Why did Perseus behead Medusa? The legends speak only of a monster, ever of the woman, nor of the sorrowful tide that changed her fate. This is that hidden story, told softly beneath the sound of rain. Part 1. The priestess of the goddess Medusa was not always a monster, nor always an echo of terror. Once, she was a gentle girl of priestess, devoted to Athena, living in the warm hush of a holy temple. Before she became legend, she was simply a keeper of peace, and beloved for her kindness. Medusa moved like morning light through the temple of Athena, her days woven from gentle rituals and quiet prayers. She awoke before the sun, tending the altar's light, gathering fresh flowers and sweeping petals from marble with her bare feet, humble, serene, and radiant as the sea at dawn. She brought calm with every glance to those who visited the temple. Medusa seemed touched by divinity. Her gentle beauty whispered from village to village, but she saw herself only as a servant of the goddess, her eyes lowered, her hands reverent in every task. No pride lived in her. Her loveliness was simply a quiet fact, like sunlight through the colonnade. Young acolytes drifted after her learning the sacred ways. Elder priestesses entrusted her with the deepest rites. All the while, Medusa asked nothing for herself, only for wisdom, for the small joys that fill sacred silences. Outside, the world roared and raged, but within the marble temple, oaths and prayers, golden sunbeams, and soft laughter made a world of safety. The garden's pools shimmered, doves wooed gently overhead. Each day was innocence, drawn in golden thread. But the world never stands still. Air stirs. A sudden hush creeps into the temple garden. Far out at sea, a god's hunger rises like a storm by the sacred pool. Medusa lifts her head, feeling just. For a moment, the eyes of fate upon her. Not yet fear, not yet grief, like an omen in the wind, the warning of change approaching. Night falls. She lights candles at Athena's feet, trusting the timeless protection of faith. She cannot know that the sea comes closer, carrying a thunder that will shake the stones of her sanctuary. Medusa sleeps beneath the goddess's gaze, her innocence like a veil. But already, out past the horizon, destiny whispers on the rising waves. Part 2. The sea god comes ashore. Listen. Even when the world is wrapped in peace, the sea never truly sleeps. Medusa dreamed that night of soft things, the hush of doves, the glimmer of olive groves beneath the moon, her own hands arranging offerings at dawn beyond the marble walls. Though the wind was changing, the rain that had fallen gentle as a lullaby now swept against the earth in fitful surges, each droplet carrying with it a deeper silence, though the very air were bracing for something vast and implacable, far out beyond the temple. Poseidon, god of sea and storm, felt the shifting of the world. The gods of Olympus, for all their grandeur, sometimes longed for what they did not have shadows of mortal love. Glimmers of earthly life, brief and bright as fireflies before the ocean's tide. Poseidon was powerful, formless, relentless, force that cannot understand pause or refusal. His gaze found Medusa, and what he saw made longing relentless and heavy. This tale is not kindness, not the easy weaving of fate. It is a story shaped by the silent violence of gods and the silence that follows when sacred things are broken. It was just before dawn when Poseidon came ashore. Drawn by the muted glow of lamplight in the still drowsy garden, he did not knock. Gods seldom do. The air turned wet and cold, carrying the weight of the far-off surf. A hint of salt pressed close against marble columns. The wind flattened itself to a hush, sensing what came next. Medusa did not hear the footsteps. Only the doves, startled in their rafters, sensed the wrongness. Sacred stillness inside Athena's temple, held so long by careful hands and daily prayers, seemed suddenly brittle. Even the rain paused its gentle chorus, as though unwilling to bear witness. Poseidon moved with the certainty of the inevitable. In his presence, the temple seemed smaller, the lamplight paler, the stones colder. He did not bow or ask for blessing. He looked on Medusa not as a priestess, nor as a cherished mortal, but as a prize to be taken. When Medusa met his eyes, time seemed to break. All the shields of her faith felt soft as petals. Alone against the god, she tried to summon Athena's protection, but divinity, on this night, did not answer aloud. What happened within those walls, the poets would later obscure. For no hymn dares to shout the pain of the gentle, no legend has room for the simple truth. The temple's silence was shattered like a shell, its purity carried away on a tide that could not be turned. The marble floor, so carefully swept, was left in ruins. The sacred lamp guttered low. That hush after the storm, not peace, but absence. For Medusa, the world had changed forever. Her body trembled, her soul echoed with the sound of crashing surf, with the emptiness that comes when all defenses fail. She could only cling to the altar, her prayers unsure, her voice a whisper lost in the wet gray light of morning. There, among the shattered lilies, Medusa folded herself small, like a boat dragged in by breaking waves. What was most sacred, her faith, her purity, her place in the world, had been cast into silence. The rain fell now with a steadier grief. Each dropped a tiny requiem. When first light returned, the world outside continued on in its imperceptible way. Birds called as if nothing had broken inside the temple, but the walls remembered. Stones, the carved statues, the long threads of incense smoke held the stain of what had been done. Medusa tried, with what little strength she had left, to begin the sacred tasks of mourning. Her hands shook, pouring the oil. Her lips fumbled the ancient words. Her tears, quiet as dew, fell in the pools meant for prayer and reflection. Turning at last to Athena's statue, she collapsed in front of the feet, her grief no longer containable. She begged not for vengeance, not even for understanding, but simply for protection. If the goddess would only hold her, shield her, restore the silence to this desecrated place. If, somehow, she could go back. But the goddess did not answer, not in that early hour, not as thunder rolled far off, not as the rain began to beat harder on the broken marble. There is a vastness and impassivity in gods, sometimes, that mortals cannot cross. Even faith, at its truest, sometimes meets only the blank, cold return of fate. Medusa knelt in that silence and found the coldest truth. What dignity remained was hers alone to hold. The sun climbed, pale and indifferent, above the horizon. In the village below, the people woke and went about their simple chores. In the world of men and gods, Medusa's sorrow was invisible, a whisper behind closed doors, scandal only to those who believed in the impossible justice of divine halls. But inside that temple, there would never again be true stillness. The sanctity had been torn, and with it, Medusa's place in the world. The house of the goddess became, for her, a prison of memory and shame. She gathered her torn robes, smoothed her hair with trembling fingers, and tried to wipe the evidence of grief from her face. To all who saw her, she was changed, but no one asked why. The priests glanced away, uneasy with the storm in her eyes, too sacred to touch, too painful to name. That evening, as the storm waned and the rain fell softer, Medusa found herself kneeling alone in the sanctuary once more. She cupped her hands before Athena's serene visage and whispered the only prayer she had left. Protect me, keep me from harm, hide me from the eyes of gods and men outside the ocean side. The rain tapped gently at the window ledges as if mourning with her. The day ended, not with triumph, not with clarity, but with sorrow and silence. In the hush that followed, Medusa's fate was sealed. In her brokenness, she was more vulnerable, more mortal than ever. Yet, within that same silence, something else began to awaken a strange, cold power. Coiling unseen beneath the surface of her skin, it's like serpents yet to be called from sleep. There are moments in every story when the world does not split with thunder, but with the smallest sound, a prayer in an empty sanctuary, a single tear lost amid the rain. Medusa, kneeling in the ruins of her faith, did not yet know what would come, because the goddess was listening at last, okay? And the gods, both cruel and kind, were not done weaving her fate. Outside, the temple steps steamed from the rain. In the sea, for now, withdrew silent, spent. Part 3. Athena's Curse. What does it sound like when a goddess enters a room? Sometimes there is thunder, the roar of distant war, the crash of shield against spear. But tonight, the air is cold and heavy, brittle with tension, and it is not Athena's anger that fills the silent temple, but her absence awaiting, okay? A judgment that hangs, unspoken, in every trembling breath. Medusa kneels at Athena's feet, robes stained with salt and sorrow, her prayers spent and thin. She is no longer a girl of sunlight and innocence, not even the keeper of her own pain, okay? She is hollowed out, like a shell battered empty by the sea, hoping still for comfort, for forgiveness, for even a word from the goddess she once called protector. Outside, the rain has turned to mist, blurring the distant shapes of mountains and olive trees, cloaking the marble steps with a sheen as pale as moonlight. The doves are silent now, huddled beneath broken rafters. The world is holding its breath. She senses, suddenly, she is not alone. A shimmer of gold shivers through the sanctuary, the last warmth of day paling into twilight. The walls seem to pulse, every carved pillar resonant with an ancient, inescapable presence. Athena is here, not as comfort, not as solace, but as the embodiment of law, of consequence, of the cold, eternal eye of divinity. Medusa rises on unsteady feet. She dares not look up. What can she offer the goddess now? What is left of her devotion? She trembles, and it is not just the cold. A hush deeper than any rain settles over the room. Athena stands before her, shadow and gold, eyes unreadable, distant as the moon. She does not ask what happened. She does not bid her priestess speak. It is as if the goddess knows, as all gods know, what passes beneath their gaze, and yet she is silent. And then, with a voice as cool and unbending as marble, Athena pronounces her judgment. Let no man gaze upon you and live. The words fall like stones. They do not carry comfort, only decree. They are colder than any storm Poseidon ever brought. They shatter the last fragile pieces of Medusa's hope before Medusa can plead, before she can even weave. A strange fire courses through her veins. She gasps. The pain is fierce and white, but it is not the pain of flesh. It is the undoing of what she once was, the forging of something new, beautiful and terrible as a curse. Her hair, once a river of night, hisses and splits. Fine strands become living serpents, green and gold and black as venom, writhing and coiling around her brow. Her eyes, once deep with gentleness, blaze now with the sharpness of a blade. a gaze that holds death and will turn to stone any who meet it. Her skin grows colder, pale as bone, touched by the mark of exile and power intertwined. She stares at her reflection shattered, now in the polished bronze she once used to arrange her hair. She cannot recognize the face that meets her. The serpents whisper to her in sibilant, wordless voices. Fear is their language, and loneliness. Her tears cannot fall for long. Even they will turn to salt, to stone, and join the hush of things, lost forever. Medusa backs away from the feet of Athena's statue. She tries to call out, to plead that this was not her fault, that she begged for shelter, not punishment. But Athena's eyes, carved in cold marble, do not weep. The goddess's silence is complete in her devastation. Medusa understands that this, too, is worship, to bear what the gods inflict, to transform pain into something that the world cannot ignore. She is gifted, not with protection, but with a new power, one that will set her forever apart from other mortals. The priests of the temple are the first to see her as she flees, huddled in a cloak, hair twitching, eyes hidden behind shaking hands. They reach out to help, but she warns them away, unable to bear the thought of harming anyone else. Their kindness chills to terror. The moment she glances back, all it takes is a flicker. A moment's meeting, gaze, and their smiles freeze, their bodies still mid-concern. One by one, the priests turn to pale marble, sacred and unmoving. Their extinction is sudden, quiet, and complete. She stumbles out into the misty garden, the softness of rain kissing her skin. The world has turned against her, not by choice, not by wickedness, Kila, but by the cold decree of a goddess, outraged not by Medusa's suffering, Kila, but by the violation of her temple's sanctity. Somewhere, high above, Athena remains in her divine distance, a guardian, a judge, but never again Medusa's comfort. Banished, Medusa flees, leaving the only home she ever knew behind. The people of the village avert their eyes. None follow her into the wilds. The tale grows in whispers of snakes, where hair should twist. Love a stare that unmans the bravest hero. She travels until land yields to a barren edge, where cliffs plunge into the frothing sea. Each step she takes, she feels the weight of lost sand, the chilling birth of something else. Injustice has a cost. For Medusa, the price is to be remade, armored against all harm. Monstrous in the eyes of men and God alike. Rain falls even here, at the world's lonely edge, washing the salt from her face. Tana, the serpents, nestle close, restless and uncertain. They are her only company, now these symbols of silence, of exile, of the double-edged gift that Athena gave. She does not know yet how legend will twist her tale. She only knows sorrow and the ache that follows transformation. Cold, unloved, she wraps herself in loneliness and learns to live with it. A single question echoes in her heart: why must the innocent bear the mark of the unforgivable? In the distance, thunder rolls, soft as an old memory. Even here, fate follows her. Even now, she is not forgotten. And so, amid coils of rain and snake-scaled hair, Medusa becomes what the world will fear: a monster made from innocence, and a curse born out of a prayer unmet. Part 4. The monster in the shadows listener softer. Rain falls now, washed thin by the slow, ancient wind that sweeps over broken cliffs and hollowed shore. There is no temple here, only wildness, gray stone, and the endless sigh of waves gnawing at the roots of the world. This is where Medusa finds herself. This is where every hurt, every echo of her old life is carried away by the tide. She wanders, the ragged coastline at the edge of everything, a place forgotten by men and gods alike. Here, The sky always holds a hush of sorrow, clouds trailing like veils across the face, the blue of day always blurred and damp. Rain patters on the rocks, on the grass that grows in hard, salt-cracked patches, cleaves, and gathers in little pools where Medusa sometimes catches the glint of her new eyes. She turns away each time, afraid to look too long, afraid of herself. How quickly stories travel, even to places they have never seen, from distant towns and echoing markets. Warnings begin to fly on the windtails of a gorgon, a monster whose very gaze can strip the life from bone, whose hair rides with venomous snakes. Fathers caution their sons. Mothers bolt their doors at dusk. Fishermen, landing on the wrong shore, lose their breath at the distant figure moving along a lonely cliff. She becomes a rumor to frighten children, a lesson in what happens when sanctity is destroyed. But inside the monster, Medusa is only a girl, wounded and bewildered, longing only for the hush that once filled her days. She spends hours sitting, motionless on the wet sand, listening to the rain and the rhythm of the sea. Her thoughts turning and twisting as restlessly as the serpents she now bears. Sometimes she hums old prayers under her breath, their words nearly lost between the crash of wave and sigh of sky. No pilgrims come here, no friends. Her only companions are the snakes, who are not cruel but hungry, not wicked but restless. They whisper to her in a language that is half sorrow, half warning. In sleep, they curl softly beside her, seeking comfort that she cannot give. She awakens most days with the taste of tears, salt and sharp, on her lips. Years may pass, or only days' time. Here is measured only by the moon's cycle and the endless changes of the restless sea. Medusa learns to live with this new self. She studies the land's emptiness, memorizing each gnarled tree, each stone where seabirds nest. To the distant villages, she is a phantom, too dreadful to confront. To herself, she is something more, fragile grief given shape, memory bound with scales. The only living things that dare approach are small creatures, frogs, crabs, sometimes even a wild dog. She is careful, always careful, turning her gaze away, never allowing herself to look directly. Some nights, she dares to wander the moon-silvered shore, feet trailing in the surf, face hidden beneath a tangled hood. In this exile, Medusa builds a life from scraps. She fashions little shrines of driftwood and stone, whispering prayers not to Athena, but to the hollow sky. She hangs flowers in the cracks of rock, lets rain fill her palm, offering what small beauty she can. Nothing answers, only the sea. Always the sea speaking in a language she cannot bear to hear. Yet some remnants of her old tenderness survive. Medusa tends a garden of wild herbs among the stones, rosemary, mint, the stray violet peeping from mud. When storms break the coast, she sings softly to her snakes, calming them with lullabies. On the rare days when sunlight breaks through, she sits facing away from her own shadow, soaking in the warmth but never daring to stare long at the puddles and pools the rain has left behind. All things, even monsters, long for comfort. All creatures, even those cursed by gods, ache to be remembered. But memory is a torment here. Sometimes Medusa dreams of her old life, the courtyards shimmering in dawn, the little stone steps she swept, the lamp she tended for the goddess. In her dreams, her hair is smooth again and her eyes soft. The girls she once guided still follow, her laughing, their faces alive and bright. The sun is always shining. She wakes again and again, weeping in the gray dark, her hands clawing the air as if she might reach back and pull herself through the thin skin of time. But always the snakes wake with her hissing, reminding her of the body she now wears, the exile she cannot question and cannot end. Outward, the legend grows. Brave men reckless or desperate come seeking glory, each believing the tales, each swearing they will slay the Gorgon and restore honor to their name. Medusa does not wish for violence. She does not want blood. She only wishes to be left alone. Yet when they find her, when some foolhardy soul meets her gaze, however briefly, are lost to the stone, their faces are always the same. Surprise, then awe, then fear. She never looks closely, never lets herself linger on the statues left by her curse. Grief must have its borders, too, or else it will consume what remains of her heart. The winds howl louder, the rain falls sharper. Medusa withdraws farther into her cave, deeper into shadow, learning at last to accept her solitude. Still, she listens to the patter of rain, to the muffled roar of ocean. She becomes a story in the mouths of the world monster. Warning, tragedy while within, she is simply a woman, suffering and unchanged, holding tightly to what little gentleness sorrow has not stolen from her. In the night, when the storm passes and quiet returns, she wonders, is anyone listening? Is anyone remembering the girl she used to be? The world sleeps on. The rain washes away all other voices, and Medusa, alone in the dark, curls in sorrow and tries to remember herself. Part 5. A hero is named Perseus, and the kings challenge the world moves on. As it always does, the pulse and drift of lives, unaware of tragedy on lonely shores. In a distant land, many days from the cliffs where Medusa hides from her own reflection, new stories are spun, and the rain now falls soft upon tiled roofs and royal courts. Here, fate prepares a new player, the one who will be named hero, though the truth will hold more shadow than song. Perseus was a young man, not yet tempered by sorrow, but full of restless hope and the simmering need to prove himself worthy, in a world where glory could change the course of a life. He was not the heir of kings, nor the child of comfort. His mother Dano had raised him with courage, a small world defined by a mother's love and the crash of surf outside their modest home. Yet now he lived as ward to King Medusa, clever, capricious ruler who often looked upon others as pieces in his endless games. It was on a day thick with storm that the court gathered, feasting to mark the king's betrothal union he did not truly desire, save for the power it promised. Medusa, his eye ever on advantage, watched Perseus, marking the strength in his shoulders, the pride of youth easily bent by fear of shame. With serpentine craft, the king raised his cup and spoke. Tell me, young Perseus, what would you bring as a wedding gift? Should I ask it? The guests fell silent. The rain hammered the windows as Perseus answered brightly. Anything, Lord King, that you should command? Medusa smiled then, iced to the marrow. Then bring me the head of Medusa, the Gorgon of whom all Greece trembles. Let that be your tribute, or let your promise be forfeit. A hush followed. Not even the wind outside dared to intrude. It was a dare meant to trap, an impossible quest spun from arrogance. Medusa wanted Perseus gone, hoping he would vanish on the wild roads beyond the world, never to return. To the court, the task was just a cruel jest. Only Perseus took the vow seriously. For what else can the young do in a world that so often tests them with things they cannot refuse? He left the palace as soon as the morning came, his mother's hand brushing his brow, tears hidden in her eyes, prayers breathed into his cloak. The city receded behind him, the noise of its festival softening beneath the low, rolling drum of rain. Alone, Perseus set out with nothing but resolve in the calling of his fate. Yet no man may face a monster and hope to return without help greater than his own strength. This the gods know. Kit, this the stories always require. Somewhere on the lonely paths where the world narrows, Athena watched with eyes neither cruel nor kind, gauging the courage she herself had once denied to another. The rain fell in silver threads against her armor, dousing none of her resolve. Hermes, swift and sly, appeared beside her, a glimmer of laughter in the wild night. "Will you help this boy?" Hermes asked, his voice soft as a reed in wind. Athena, perhaps remembering her old priestess, replied, "He must be guided, but not saved. Even the pure need wisdom when facing divine sorrow." And so, as Perseus journeyed onward, despairing at the edge of exhaustion, the gods revealed themselves not in thunder, but in simple, dreamlike signs. Hermes came first, a figure at the crossroads, his smile edged with mischief and care alike. He offered Perseus winged sandals, their feathers glistening in the rain, promising the power to run faster than any mortal to and from mortal doom. And a sword, Hermes added, forging it from celestial fire, no ordinary blade, but one sharp enough to cut the night itself. Athena appeared next, face veiled beneath the rain, eyes cool and measuring. She carried with her a shining shield, not meant to block, but to reflect. "Do not look upon Medusa directly. Let your eyes find her only in the shield's glass," she instructed. Her voice echoed with the sorrow of an old betrayal in something gentler, still a warning, perhaps, or a plea. Perseus, with sword, shield, and winged sandals upon his feet, thanked the gods, but his heart warbled with unease. Even with such gifts, the path felt heavy-veined with dread, the sense of a fate greater than his own hope or will. He found a quiet place outside the city to prepare a garden overgrown, laced with drifting petals, the sky weeping a steady rain. There he sat, sword across his lap, shield at his side, hands gripping his knees as he listened to the world slip quietly toward dusk. What is it to be named a hero? Perseus wondered. Is it the courage to fight, or the willingness to obey? He thought of his mother, the echo of her voice, and the prayers tucked against his skin. He thought, too, of the stories he'd heard the fearsome Gorgon, the doom promised to any who sought her out. He did not know. As he laced the sandals to his feet and brushed water from the shield's polished face, what tragedy would await him? He did not know, as the rain deepened and the wind leaned close. Whose sorrow was written in the curse he now approached? Only that he must go. That this story required him to walk through the night, to seek a monster in the world's last shadow, carrying with him the gifts of gods who remember more than men ever will. When at last Perseus rose and set forth into the wet, whispering, dark, the rain was his only companion. Each drop was a measure of his heartbeat, each gust of wind a silent witness to the unfolding of legend. In his chest, the mingled certainty of duty and dread. He did not yet know that the story he was entering was not just about the slaying of a monster, but the shattering, once again, of innocence transformed by the hands of gods and men. Part 6. The island of Silence Ring carried Perseus through uncharted reaches of sea and night, the world blurring at his sides as the winged sandals bore him beyond maps and memory. Day and darkness twisted together. The horizon melted into mist and dreams. Sometimes it seemed to Perseus he was alone in an empty realm, a shifting nowhere marked only by the soft, relentless drumming of rain upon water. At last, the sandals carried him to an island unknown to men. The rocks here thrust upward like broken teeth from the earth, encircled by a surf that never ceased its hunger. The sky weighed heavier. Even the gulls kept their distance. All sound fell away except for the thud and hiss of rain upon stone. Silence, vast and deep as the grief that lived here. He stepped onto the shore. At first, he did not understand what he was seeing. Around him stood figures as pale as dawn. Some stooped in the pose of fleeing, others half turned, a hand raised, a mouth opened forever in a silent cry. Everywhere he turned were statues, scattered among thistles and wildflowers, fixed in the last moment of their lives. The stories had told Perseus to expect a beast, but not this. Not the Garden of Sorrow, where every statue was once a man, and every shape a testament to hope cut short. The faces haunted him, some with courage, some with terror, with the stunned betrayal that comes only at the instant when fate turns unkind. The shield trembled in his hands. He was not here for glory now, only to do what destiny required, though the cost, for some reason he could not name, suddenly seemed unbearable. He picked his way among the statues, the rain threading silver paths down each stone cheek. Curled about their feet, wild roses reached to clutch their arms. None would ever move again. Perseus moved silently, his breath shallow. The shield angled before his eyes like the memory of a dream. The cave's mouth yawned beneath the cliff, drowned in shadow. Perseus hesitated there, feeling the world contract around him, heartbeat echoing, louder than any sea. The rain followed, tapping the rocks, weaving its own quiet music. He held the shield before him not to defend, but to see reflecting the world behind and above. Within, the darkness was deep. Not simply the absence of light, but the presence of something unspeakable, ancient, wounded. Theseus advanced step by a slow step, until at last the shimmer of serpents hissed in the shield's dimming glass. There, the center of the haunted gloom, Medusa slept curled upon the stone, her body wrapped close. Like a child, lost in sorrow, her snakes gathering, in uneasy rest upon her shoulders and brow. The rain had found its way inside, a thin silver trickle painting tiny mirrors upon her cheek and winding through the hair that was no longer hair at all. Perseus saw not a monster, but a woman, shoulders bare, arms clutching herself, brow furrowed in troubled dreams. The shield caught her face awash in shadows, and he was filled with a slow, dreadful calm. She is not the creature they spoke of, he thought. She is afraid. She is simply alone. But he did not turn aside. He remembered Athena's words, the gifts that drove his footsteps, the promise that bound him to an ending, written before his first breath. With regret thick as thunder, Perseus drew the blade Hermes had given, a sword made for ending sorrow, as much as granting triumph. The snakes stirred, restless in their sleep. Medusa's whole body shivered at the sound. Perseus gripped the mirrored shield, turning his face away, and guided himself by its trembling vision. Sunlight, breaking it, lashed through tears in the storm, gleamed once on the blade's steel, and then, guided by the reflection, he struck. The world did not roar. There was no cry of rage or of battle, only the swift, merciful, and dreadful silence of a sleeping woman's life ending. Barely awake, Medusa's last feeling was not agony, but surprise to hush before a final release. The rain outside seemed to pause, holding its breath for her. The snakes, her only friends, fell, limp and quiet, curling beside the lifeless form. Blood, dark as rubies, pooled quietly on stone, joining with the trickling rain and running in fissures to the cave's mouth. For a moment, time stood still. Perseus was left trembling, blade in hand. He gazed only at the shield, unable to face what he had done. In that final reflection, Medusa took on a different aspect, no longer a terror, but a sorrow so vast and gentle it might drown the sharpness of all things. What had begun as a quest for vengeance and honor was finished as something much quieter. A tragedy spun in violence, a mercy indistinguishable from doom. With shaking hands, Perseus wrapped Medusa's head in cloth, careful not to look. Tease twitched once, twice, and then stilled forever. The shield fell from his grasp, splintering the last image of her face, streaked by rain and shadow and love unborn. He left the cave, heart like an anchor in his chest. The statues did not turn to watch him go. The island's silence was now complete, the only witness to grief, the measured, endless rhythm of the falling rain and the hush of stones that once were men. Outside, the leaves and the cliffs bore the memory of what had been lost and changed. The seaside, and Perseus, carrying triumph and tragedy in equal measure, vanished into the gathering mist, and in the hush that followed, the world closed once more over sorrow and legend. Part 7. From Blood, Life, Pegasus, and Legacian. Silent, sodden ground of that cave, the rain's lullaby continued soft and inexorable, washing away traces of all but memory. Medusa's tragic sleep was ended, but the story refused to still itself. Even in death, the gods are not done. From suffering, from things broken by fate, new wonders sometimes rise. Outside, storm and tide had become Medusa's final mourners. Yet within the shadowy chamber, something remarkable stirred. From the pool of her blooded dark, shimmering, almost celestial red, came a movement as if the cave itself were waking. The air shimmered briefly, cold with the presence of some old magic. And in that breath between rain beats, what had been stilled now blossomed, wing and hooves, golden mane, and a cry newborn into the world. Pegasus, the wild white horse with wings, broad as clouds, and Chrysor, shining warrior child, emerged as if creation herself were redeeming sorrow. Both were children of the sea and the earth, of Medusa's mortal body and Poseidon's lingering divinity born, not in the joy of union, but in the trembling moment when a curse was ended at last. Pegasus leaped from the rock, his mane catching droplets of rain, each feather a miracle. The sky seemed to open for him, the gloom split with sudden, radiant light. For a heartbeat, the hush of tragedy was transformed. The myth took on new meaning, a whisper of hope fluttering inside the silent grief. As quickly as they arrived, the children of Medusa vanished into the legend that had brought them forth. Pegasus rose, wings scattering rain into 100 prisms, galloping heavenward toward the freedom the world denied his mother. Chrysor, silent, strode into realms unknown. Life had unfurled itself from death. Tent, the sorrow of Medusa fed wonders that would outlast the memory of her suffering. Perseus watched these marvels in awed disbelief, his breath caught, his spirit shaken by the mystery of what his hand had helped create. His task complete, he gathered himself and turned to the head Medusas, but not the Medusa he now understood. Wrapped tight in cloth, her face would never meet the sun again. Yet her power remained contained, potent in a way mortals and gods both feared. Carefully, as Athena instructed, Perseus stowed the prize in a leather sack. The serpents, though stilled, retained their frightful beauty, their eyes and fangs tangled by a silence deeper than stone. Here was power enough to petrify whole armies. Here was vengeance, transformed in artifact. Now, it's passed from the suffering of an innocent woman into the hands of a young hero. He left the island behind, the rain at his back, and the future uncertain before him. Each step away was heavy with the mingled weight of duty and regret. The mist held the hush of the cave, and Perseus found his gaze drawn again and again to the sack at his side, as if it breathed a secret he could never unhear. But the journey was not yet done. The king who sent Perseus on his fatal errand still waited in his distant hall, expecting the impossible demise of a pawn, not a hero's return. And so Perseus traveled, passing through lands thick with enemies and those who hungered for the Gorgon's deadly gift. Time and again, set by those who wished him harm, bandits, monstrous beasts, and even the treacherous king himself, Perseus, called upon Medusa's head. With each unwrapping, each moment of revelation, her curse lived again, a single flash of those terrible eyes. And stone claimed the living, freezing horror and aggression as new statues in the dust. Some said Perseus used it justly, punishing the wicked. Others whispered the curse knew no mercy, even when wielded by a hand that shook Dot in every telling. The head of Medusa accomplished what the gods and men so often could not. It ended violence. With a glance, turned the proud low, and left a hush where once arrogance and might had roared. Medusa, the innocent, became Medusa, the monstrous. Then Medusa, the weapon, her suffering reborn as a warning, a curse transformed into the instrument of divine justice. Yet, as Perseus marched from victory to victory, a sorrow clung to his. Triumphs of grief he did not always understand. The shield, the sandals, even the sword, became heavier with each use. For each enemy stilled, he remembered the moment in the cave, the face of the sleeping woman, and the quiet that had followed, the execution of his holy charge. Somewhere between myth and memory, Medusa endured not as the villain etched in marble, but as a force both beautiful and grievous, her story forever entangled with his Dot. But in Olympus and the far places of the world, not all were blind to thee. Truth, Athena herself, the architect of both gift and curse, set Medusa's image upon her shield to aegis forever, a reminder to gods and mortals of the cost of injustice. In doing so, she bound Medusa's legacy to her own, an uneasy tribute that asked as much forgiveness as it granted power. Pegasus' sword and freedom, a symbol of what cannot be caged by pain. In every tale that followed, the birth from blood was retold, how out of suffering, wonder, and power were born. Medusa's myth shifted with the passing centuries, sometimes a warning, sometimes a guardian, always a riddle at the tangled heart of divinity and fate. And Perseus, gift-bearer and orphan-maker, carried unwreathed in glory, shadowed by sorrow, walking always with the sound of distant rain trailing him, ever a reminder of what can never be made whole. Part 8. Medusa's legacy. Time passes. As quietly as rainfall on ancient stone, and myth settles over the stories of gods and mortals, smoothing their sharp edges into memory. Perseus returns home, lauded as a hero, his tale etched into the marble of palaces and the songs of poets. But what of Medusa, who remains after her death? What becomes of a woman turned monster and a monster turned legend? Head of Medusa travels far, its hollow gaze turned against the enemies of Perseus and the unjust kings he encounters. Each time the curse is revealed, fear and awe ripple outward, men cast in stone, tyrants silenced, and onlookers reminded of the fine line between power and terror. The world, for a time, remembers only the horror of her gaze, not the sorrow of her heart. Yet, as the rain falls, gentle and persistent, truth endures in quiet corners, like wild thyme pushing up through cracks in broken pavement. For not all forget what came before in small sanctuaries. Priestesses still light candles for the women who suffer the judgment of the mighty. Murmur Medusa's name not as an incantation of dread, but as a prayer soft and slow, woven into the air with the perfume of olive oil and crushed petals in dim alcoves. Some keep small charms in the shape of a woman with snakes for hair, not to ward off evil, but to honor the wounded, to remember the innocent and the wronged. Children in distant villages listen to the wind and rain, hearing tales from their elders. Once there was a girl with gentle hands and a quiet heart, who brought peace to a temple and kindness to all she met. Once there was a priestess who was punished not for her sins, but for her suffering. Once there was a Gorgon whose curse touched all who looked upon her, but whose true legacy was not fear, but resilience. Through these stories, Medusa is restored to herself, not merely a beast, but a figure of sorrow and transformation, guardian and a warning against the casual cruelties of the powerful. The stone statues weather, softened by centuries of rain and wind, their features blurred with moss and memory. In some places, they are all that remain mute, tributes to the men who mistook tragedy for conquest, who did not see the human heart behind the legend. In others, Medusa becomes a protector of the vulnerable, invoked by those who feel unseen or abandoned. The rain washes away the harshest judgments, leaving only truth's impression, faint but persistent. Athena, in her cold, eternal watchfulness, forever bears the mark of her former priestess, a likeness of Medusa's head upon her shield, the aegis. It is a complex remembrance, both weapon and apology, both threat and tribute. Each battle fought beneath its gaze is a reminder of the double-edged blade of power, and the terrible price paid by those who displease the gods. Pegasus, Medusa's child, soars beyond Olympus, his great white wings scattering clouds, bringing forth fountains when his hooves touch the earth. Life, wild and miraculous, springs from the blood of sorrow. Even in loss, Medusa's legacy gives rise to beauty no cruelty can destroy. And Perseus, for all his hero's glory, is never entirely free of what passed in that silent cave. The rain follows him, sometimes in the quietest hours, whispering a different tale story of innocence lost, burdens carried, and the unknowable sadness that shadows every triumph. The world, in its wisdom or its forgetfulness, lets most memories drift away with time. Yet on nights when storms rattle shuttered windows, when thunder echoes like the surf of a far-off shore, a different song fills the darker lullaby for the woman whose suffering became legend, whose pain became power, and whose gentleness was not lost but transformed. Even now, those who are lonely, outcast, or transformed by sorrow may think of her. They may see themselves reflected, half shadow, half light in the woman who wept at the world's edge and asked for nothing but to be seen, truly, by the eyes of her goddess. If you walk the wild places at twilight, rain brushing softly at your coat, you may feel her presence in the hush after lightning, in the glint of wet stone, in the wild herbs that spring from the hardest ground. Medusa is with you, not as terror, but as memory, not as a monster, but as a quiet guardian, woven now into every prayer whispered for shelter and every blessing for those harmed and made strange by the world's indifference. So the story ends not with shouting nor with thunder, but with silence, a silence that holds all the things unsaid, all the lives transformed, and the wounds yet unhealed. The rain continues, soft, gentle, endless, falling on the ruins of temples, the lapping shores, and the quiet faces that still remember. Listen, in that hush, you may hear it now. A priestess, once beautiful and beloved, kneeling in a garden where doves murmur overhead, a voice praying not for vengeance, for understanding, a sorrow transformed into legend, and a legend that, through all its retellings, becomes something more, a symbol of pain that did not break her, but shaped her into a guardian of the wounded, a sentinel against forgotten crimes. Somewhere, Medusa is remembered. In the shimmer of rain, in the hush of old stone, in the hearts of those who know that sometimes the truest stories are the ones whispered, soft and slow, after all other voices have faded away. And so we end with twilight thick on the world, the sound of rain settling on ancient ground, and Medusa's memory carried forward, as gentle as a dream, as lasting as a stone in the quiet, cleansing dark. Let the world be gentle with you tonight. Let the quiet be your shelter. Let the rain wash away sorrow, leaving only calm. Good night.